properly.
Excellent. Does forgiving give abusers more power?
Or you could say, does it give the persons who harmed us, which we're using synonymously with abusers, more power? Obviously not, right? Well, a person who sins has less power automatically. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a reason for that. God's laws are operating against the sin. So when you've got the time in reality, in God's universe, the time when you have the most power is when you commit the least sin. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because the least sin gives you the most freedom to operate, and you're able to operate within all of the laws, receive all the benefits of the laws without receiving any penalties for breaking or the attempt to break them. So the time when a person has most power is when they don't sin. Right? Yes. When they sin, they have less power. Mm-hmm. So there's two parts to this question. One is, does forgiving give abusers more power? Well, abusers have less power automatically as soon as they sin. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't give them more power in reality. Yeah. So God's laws don't give an abuser more power than a person who doesn't abuse. Mm-hmm. God's laws give the person who is more in harmony with love more power. Mm-hmm. That's what God's laws do. But here there's almost in the question this sort of flavour, you could say, or idea or concept that I'm giving them power.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Through my act of forgiveness.
Through my act of forgiveness, I'm giving them power.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is we do give people power. And the way we give people power is by sinning, actually, by our sin. By not forgiving, you give them power. You give them power over you. Yeah. In other words, they know that they annoy you, and many of them might even like that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So you give them power over you, and you give them power over your life and your choices and your decisions. So in that regard, you are giving them power but it's not giving them the power. You are putting yourself in a more powerless state.
Yes.
By acceding to all of the stuff that's coming from them. Right.
Yeah, so crucially, you're saying not forgiving places me in a powerless state. Forgiving, conversely, empowers me.
That's right. Not forgiving is a sin. Remember my first comment. If I sin, I have less power.
Yeah.
Not forgiving is a sin, therefore not forgiving causes me to have less power.
Yeah.
That's the natural result. Forgiving is not a sin. It's actually in harmony with the law. So therefore, I will have more power if I forgive than if I don't. Yeah. In terms of giving the abuser more power, the abuser doesn't have more power when he sins anyway. From God's perspective, he doesn't have more power. So technically, he has no more power. He only has the power I give him.
Yeah.
I give him the power when I refuse to forgive.
So can we talk about that in practical terms,
Sure.
how that practically happens?
You see it happening all the time, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want to explain how that practically happens?
Well, perhaps we need to come up with an example where somebody harms us and then, how we give them more power. So an example is somebody demands that we meet their addiction. Uh-huh. They've sinned.
Can we be specific about the addiction?
Well, let's say the addiction is they demand that we make them feel good about what they did. Just a simple little thing seemingly little thing like that.
Give them praise.
We give them praise and attention.
Approval.
And, a lot of people who do things only do them to get other people to give them adulation, right? That's an addiction. So they don't do it because they want to live in harmony with God's laws. In fact, the fact that they have a demand that somebody else means they're not living in harmony with God's laws. So here the person who is the sinner, who is demanding of us that we give him adulation or praise, he's the sinner, right? He's broken the law. Mm-hmm. From God's perspective, there's less praise.
Yes.
He's broken the law. He's in a more powerless state. Yeah. From God's perspective,
there'll be less rewards in God's universe.
Exactly. He's going to be rewarded less for what he did. Yeah. Not more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So God's laws is already dealing with that. Yes. This person's sin, God's laws is already have an effect on the person who's sinning. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's all done and dusted from God's perspective.
Yeah.
That person having the demand is an attempt to make me give them something, right? So let's say the person has a demand that I give them praise. They do the thing. I don't give them praise. What do? They get angry. Mm-hmm. That's another sin. God's law deals with that.
Yeah.
They might get abusive. That's another sin. God's law deals with that. They might get violent. That's another set of laws. God's laws deals with that for them. Right? And they may do all of that to me.
Yep.
Right? So there's quite a lot of things where I may feel harmed by them. Right? Now, what do I do? If I give them the praise they're demanding, I'm sinning. My power is less. If I give them the satisfaction of responding to their violence, I'm sinning. My power is less. So let's take the practical example where a person does something wrong. It's just like feeds an addiction that they have, for example, and their addiction, let's say, is that they require of me that I give them praise and adulation for whatever it is that they do. And if I don't give them that praise and adulation for what they do, they might initially be upset, but they might also get angry and they might get even violent for their particular thing that they're requiring of me. So under those circumstances, God's laws have already corrected the person. God's laws are in operation with the person every time they sin. So the first part of the sin is their demand of me to meet their addiction. That's the first part of their sin.
Well, this first part is wanting to do things only for approval, isn't it?
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
Even that's being corrected already by God's laws.
Yeah.
And then they sin by demanding that I respond to their action that they took with approval. Now, that demand has also broken God's laws, so that there's a response there from God's laws. On top of that, then they might get all upset about it. Well, they're upset about it is all breaking God's laws too. Yeah. So that there's an effect upon them about that as well. And then on top of that, they might get angry about it and even violent. And then, of course, God's laws will operate upon their particular actions there as well. So that's all for them.
Yeah.
That's all happening for them. For me, well, that depends completely, doesn't it, on whether because their demand of me is their first thing that I probably will feel. Their demand that I respond to their action with praise and adulation.
Yep.
Now, if I do respond, then I sin.
Yes.
As soon as I sin, my power is less.
Yeah.
So now my power is going down already. I'm choosing to make my power go down by sinning.
Yeah.
Right. So my power is less. From God's law's universal perspective, I have more restrictions placed upon me. I'm able to do less things because I've given them or met their addiction. But let's say initially I didn't. Let's say I didn't initially meet their addiction, but what happened is they got angry with me and then I met their addiction.
Yeah.
Right? So I pandered to their anger.
Yeah.
I've sinned. I've broken God's laws. There's going to be another restriction upon me. Yeah. My soul is going to be restricted because I've broken or attempted to break God's laws. Yeah. So now my power is going down. But also in giving them the response of my adulation to their rage,
yes,
I am also now making myself subservient to them.
Yes.
Which is actually another sin. Which there will be a response of God's laws. Right, towards me.
And in doing that, I'm essentially giving up my power to the person who's demanding the approval.
Which is a sin, to give up your power, and particularly to give up your righteous standing or your ethical or moral standing for the sake of avoiding someone's rage. That, from God's perspective, is a fairly severe sin.
And even me acting to give the person power, since God's laws are trying to restrict their power and I'm giving them power, I'm actually in direct opposition to God's laws in that case.
That's right. So they might have the initial feeling that actually their position is better.
Yeah.
They now have a feeling of superiority over me and so forth. But I'm actually feeding the monster.
Yeah.
And from God's perspective, I am choosing to feed the monster. And from God's perspective, I am now culpable in their sin, because I'm choosing to enable it. Yeah. And so that naturally is going to have there's going to be some consequences from sinning against God's laws that I'm now engaging in by doing that. So instead of forgiving them, recognizing they sinned and forgiving them, my desire to not recognize their sin and to feed their addiction causes now me to sin, and also now causes me to have less power. And I am giving them power, but God isn't. And this is what we see happening on earth. A lot of people say to me questions like, and I think there was one in the last assistance group, where, why is it that evil people get power? Because the people who are not evil, give it to them.
Yes.
Is the answer.
Yeah.
God doesn't give it to them.
No.
God, in fact, all of God's laws are restricting their power.
Yeah.
And if we acted in harmony with God's laws with regard to any person's evil behaviour, we would also restrict their power.
So then let's use that same example to contrast it with me entering a state of forgiveness in that situation, and how that would restrict the power of the person who has the addiction.
Let's say instead, they had this angry demand, but I never met it. Instead, I recognise the sin of their original action, which is them doing things without and only doing it for the purpose of getting some praise. And I recognise that that is a problem.
Yeah.
So I decide not to give them praise ever.
Yeah.
Until they resolve that particular problem. Does that make sense? And particularly praise about that issue. In fact, I say, the opposite. I actually decide, because I'm living in harmony with God's laws, I decide to tell you the truth. You just want me to give you praise about your particular, what you did. Now, of course, that might even make them more angry and more demanding and more even violent. And then I'll say, well, now you're even responding violently to the fact that you want me to do what you did. This is even worse, you know. Yeah. And you would keep saying these things, right? Now, the average person on earth would think that's goading a person, but this is how God's laws expect us to operate. You would keep saying these things of truth. No, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. And if they then tried to hurt you and you needed to feel about that because of some resonance for some other issue inside of you, you'd go off and have a cry if you could, and you certainly wouldn't retaliate. You'd have a cry, you'd release the emotion, you'd try to look at the causes, but you still would not give them the praise and adulation they are demanding from you.
Yeah.
Now, if you do that, that person is in a very powerless state. They can't do anything to get praise anymore. Now they might give up getting praise.
Yeah.
And just decide to do what they really want to do, and then would really see their character or nature.
Yeah.
But at least they wouldn't be fake anymore, right? Or they might decide to no longer be fake and work out what they want to do and do that. That would be good too. That would be a good outcome. But you can see that if I respond to their original sin by sinning myself, I am actually supporting them staying in their sin.
Yes.
And that forgiveness stops that. So what forgiveness does, by release of my reasons why I might feel impelled to do that, to praise them, once I release all of that, and I no longer do that, and I no longer even have a desire to do that, I am no longer supporting the other person's sin anymore.
Yeah.
And there's no way that they can ever blame me for their course of action anymore, because I am no longer supporting them in their action. And God's laws, because God's laws only operate, in penalty against the sin, and I'm not sinning, all I get is the positive results of God's laws.
Yeah.
Whether I see them right now or not is a different matter. A lot of times I don't see them because the person may get more angry and more frustrated and more violent, right? But I'll feel better with God as this is happening, right? With the person, no, I can see, no, this is just their problem, that's why they're responding the way they're responding.
Yes. Yeah. And also, crucially, you mentioned about the goading. Yes. It is possible to do this in a very unloving way that is not actually in harmony with God's laws.
That's right. It's possible to do this in a way that's actually breaking God's laws.
Yes.
If your intention is to make the person angrier, if your intention is to make them more uncomfortable, if your intention is to continually berate them, then you're breaking the law.
Yeah.
You have to do it with the right motivation to not break the law.
Yes. I just thought it was worth mentioning.
Sure.
Yeah, so let's just recap then quickly from our notes, just to really talk about how this process of forgiveness enables us to have that response that doesn't give the other person power.
Yeah.
So because forgiveness requires me to become extremely sensitive to what was done to me when the harm was done.
And perhaps here we need to say, become extremely sensitive to the sin from God's perspective.
From God's perspective, crucially.
That's really what.
Yes.
That's really how the person's harmed somebody else.
Yes.
The sin from God's perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So in order to forgive, I must know that very well and feel that very well. Then for a start, I'm far more likely to be sensitive to when that's about to happen again. And I'm far less likely to allow that towards myself because I can feel how painful it was the last time it happened and what I had
When
to
you
go
say
through.
allow it, if you go through the forgiveness process, it's not like you need to allow or disallow.
Yeah.
It's just there's no response anymore in
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
which is wonderful. You know,
is.
there's no painful emotion that you experience anymore from another person's sin.
So even if I receive the same treatment, there won't be that same response.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And what I've noticed is, on one hand, you can have a very, like in the past, sometimes 20 or 30 years ago in particular, I had some really big emotional responses to certain types of treatment.
Yes.
And then once I've worked through certain emotions, the same treatment hardly causes an impact in any areas of my life, and I certainly have no emotional response to it.
Yeah.
And this is the interesting thing, is that because the emotional response is gone, the pain is gone.
Yeah.
And so the person's doing exactly the same thing. Their pain is obviously increasing.
Yes. Yes.
Because every sin the person creates is more pain for them.
Yeah.
But your pain has decreased.
Yeah.
So I sort of sometimes see another person's sin, you can make it an opportunity for you to have less emotional response.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, a lot of people believe that holding on to their anger is what protects them and keeps them powerful, don't they?
Yeah, the reality is they're sinning when they hold on to their anger, so they have less power.
Yeah.
You know, the law requires they have less power.
Yeah.
They'll have less power, not only for now, but for as long as they hold on to this rage. So that's people forget, you know, God's laws in all of this. You know, their desire to hold on to their feeling causes so much degradation. And unfortunately, a lot of anger and rage causes a lot of our physical ailments, even in our body and so forth. So, you know, you can see not only is it painful emotionally, but it also turns into physical pain.
And it is the demand for another person to sin, isn't it? If we think back to your example, the person who didn't have their addiction met and got angry, they're really, through that rage, they're trying to force the other person to sin meet their addiction. And when I'm in a state of non-forgiveness and feeling like my rage gives me power around people who might harm me, really I'm trying to instill fear in those people, which is a sin on my part, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah, so naturally, from God's perspective, you're going to have less power and you're going to have more pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so logical, but I know from having certain memories from the first century about really intense things that have happened, and having been raised in a certain way now, that it's quite... You really have to have some faith to engage with forgiveness.
Yes.
Because you have many beliefs that this is, just like Sandra, this is the opposite of safe, what I'm about to, forgiveness, you know, if I'm about to engage forgiveness. Yeah.
But I also feel, though, that once you engage it sincerely a few times, you can feel the major changes that are happening inside of you emotionally to responding, the way you respond to different people. And once that happens, you know, you can feel it's a much freer and happier place. And so that creates some momentum of its own in terms of encouraging you to do it the next time and the next time and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Thank you.